The Knicks find themselves with a couple roster spots still to fill and lots of intriguing veteran names still out there that they could potentially fill them with. Who should they go for? We're going to talk about it right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome into Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrict.land, and he's Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, and the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. And on today's show, we got a good list of names to go over for potential final roster spot candidates for the Knicks. Could they go after an outside candidate like Malcolm Brogdon, or perhaps Marcus Smart if he gets bought out, Gary Payton II? Or could they bring someone back that's already been on the team, Landry Shamet, DeLon Wright, something like that? Lots to talk about, including some of the cap implications for those of you that are not familiar with what they're able to still do at this point and why it's like such a big deal that they kind of hit this one out of the park because they don't have too much in the way of financial flexibility left. So we got lots to talk about on today's show. But first, I want to thank you all for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making this part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. All right, Gavin. So free agent names, there's a lot of them, surprisingly, which is a whole other debate about how this new CBA has just destroyed the NBA middle class and made it so that there are now a large number of talented players, in my opinion, that should be signed already, still available at this stage of free agency, and a lot of contending teams like the Knicks that are kind of like, "Whew, man, we can't mess around. We kind of have to like sign the guy that we want and make sure that that's the guy that we want because we don't get another chance because having used the taxpayer mid-level exception, the Knicks now find themselves hard capped at the second tax apron, much like they were last year, which is going to make the whole process of filling out this roster interesting to say the least, because especially if they get some unfortunate season-ending injuries or something this year, they're pretty much just going to be down a roster spot unless they are able to get an injury exception for certain guys. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting names that are available for the Knicks to potentially go after. I'm curious who sits at the top of your list in terms of guys that the Knicks should be looking to potentially pick up with one of their final two roster spots they have to fill.
Yeah, so I had a couple of different guys. The one we've heard in the news a lot recently is Marcus Smart. Malcolm Brogdon is someone I'm always fond of. Gary Payton II, we heard earlier in free agency. And then honestly, any one of the three guys, PJ Tucker, Landry Shamet, DeLon Wright, who were part of this team last year, I would be open to varying degrees. But let's start with the new guys first. Marcus Smart has been the name du jour, 6'3" combo guard. 31 years old, 9 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, 39% from the field, 35% from three, 76% shooting last season. He still needs to be bought out by the Wizards. It feels like a lot of people are treating that as a foregone conclusion, given that they're currently 2 over the roster limit and just traded for Malachi Branham, old Knicks draft name, and Blake Wesley from the Spurs. Presumably they want to keep both those guys. If not sure why they would have traded for both of them outside of maybe some cap relief. And maybe still see Marcus Smart as a positive veteran presence. He is just like a less than a year removed from essentially being cap dumped by the Memphis Grizzlies. He's looked largely out of shape since leaving the Celtics. It seems like Brad Stevens knew. I mean, obviously the upside was bringing Kristaps Porzingis and getting multiple picks for it too. But it seems like Brad Stevens knew what he was doing, moving on from him. Just has not been the same guy the last 2 years. Dealing with a lot of injuries, not quite as explosive. We did both see him, Alex, absolutely torch the Knicks in, if I'm remembering correctly, I want to say a February, maybe early March basketball game where it got to a point where Washington just took him out of the game. Is like, dude, you're messing with the tank. So clearly some upside there. High level competitor. Still, I would say on his best nights, quite a good defender. Going to be would be interesting just because, and really, like, I think the key point with all these guys, there's not really minutes available for the Knicks right now, which is why I think it's probably more likely at the end of the day they get someone closer to the back of this list versus Smart or Brogdon, who I think would want a guaranteed role. But those two are clearly the biggest names.
Yeah, and I mean, I love him fit wise. Like, I think the nice thing about what you mentioned about like, oh, has he been in shape or is he too injury prone now or whatever, is that it's a pretty low risk proposition at the end of
Sure.
the day. I mean, I know that I just got done talking about how like the Knicks kind of have to hit this one if they want to get a contributor, because they have, uh, depending on where I read it from now, I think that because of the deal that Yabusele wound up taking, he took a little less than the max of the taxpayers mid-level exception.
Mhm.
I think, depending on who you read, it gives the Knicks 2 full veteran spots that they can give out versus having to use a second round exception to sign someone, which would pretty much, I think, mean either Najee or Diawara for them
Yeah.
because Evan McCullough doesn't count anymore because he's technically already signed 1 contract, uh,
Mhm.
his two-way deal. So it would probably be either Diawara or James Najee that they got in the cat deal that would have had to have filled that 14th spot before. But as it stands now, I think they're able to sign 2 veteran free agents and have both of them. So if Smart is an option and they can do it, I think they have to. I mean, the cool thing about him is that, I mean, one, he's only a few years removed from a Defensive Player of the Year campaign, which I mean feels really far away, but it was only 21 to 22. It's not that long ago, all things considered. And then the other thing is like, I think what appeals to me most about him is that he has ball handling ability, and can pass the ball, can handle it like off the bench, which I think would be beneficial for the Knicks, especially like if you get a twosome of him and Clarkson out there and Deuce. If you can have those three out there off the bench, I think that's pretty freaking dangerous. Especially when you consider that Smart has consistently shown throughout his career that he can guard up like many positions. Like he can guard up to 4s and 5s sometimes. I mean, depending on the guy. I still remember from back in the day, I mean, how frustrating it was to see that he could get matched up with like Porzingis, for example, and get Porzingis off his spot and put up good defense on him. And it's sort of a very like Drew Holiday type quality to how he defends at his best, where no matter who he switched on to, like, you're not gonna fully lose the possession if he's on pretty much anyone on the floor and he can adapt and defend different ways. And then obviously the intensity is good. Again, another thing that just made him horrifically annoying as a Knicks fan for years was having him on the other side on the Celtics and having to deal with all that entailed. But yeah, now at 31 years old, I mean, look, it's possible. Again, this is like sort of like a version of what we talked about with Jordan Clarkson. Also, like you can look at him and go, yeah, all right. I mean, he was on the like Grizzlies team where everything went wrong, and then he was on a Washington. It got dumped to Washington this year to a team that had nothing to play for. It's like maybe that has a little something to do with what his conditioning was like, what his effort level was like, all that stuff. If he's able to reclaim even like 80% of defensive player of the year Marcus Smart from 3-4 years ago, you're looking at one of the biggest coups of the offseason, much in the same vein as if Jordan Clarkson is able to find six man of the year Jordan Clarkson, you're also looking at another huge steal by the Knicks this offseason. So first he has to get bought out, obviously. But if that ends up happening and if the Knicks end up getting him, I think it has potential to be a really, really good signing. And if it doesn't work out, I certainly would not fault them for trying because I think that he's probably the most appealing guy to me of those available at this point for them to potentially pick up.
Yeah, and I think Mark or Malcolm Brogdon rather is the other obvious name in there. 6'4" combo guard, 32 years old. Longtime listeners of this podcast will know he's been the apple of my eye for a couple of years. Alex, I think the same could be said for you. In Portland last year, 13-4-4, 43% from the field, just 29% from three, 88% from the line. I'm going to choose to believe that 29% from three is an outlier, similar to what we saw from DeLon Wright in Milwaukee, where he was just terrible shooting the ball in a relatively small sample size. He's a career 39% shooter from three on 4 attempts per game. Heady guard, not very good defensively, but just the fact of like how like at his size with his shooting that he could be used off ball. I think in some ways him next to Brunson is a little bit more viable than Clarkson next to Brunson. I would probably still lean Deuce over him just because despite the fact that Brogdon is whatever 2-3 inches taller, Deuce is just clearly a better defender at this point. And again, it kind of goes back to the argument of why you might just want PJ Tucker to get this role and something we can talk about more in depth next segment. But like none of these guys are guaranteed minutes. And it is why I struggle to see a world where either of them would be particularly inclined to coming to the Knicks. But I think there's a case for Brogdon over Smart, though, to your point, when you are so offensively focused already in terms of the guys who are going to be in the rotation, what their strengths are, there is a case for just bringing in the best defender possible. And as we go through this list, people are going to see there are not really a lot of wings that fit that category. The best you're going to get is a bigger guard who can hold up to some extent, whether it's Shamet, whether it's bring back an old friend in DeLon Wright. So in that sense, someone like Marcus Smart, who to your point, who can guard up a little bit, is interesting. Though I love the idea of Brogdon shooting and also his ability to just like put his head down and attack gaps, playing off of Jalen Brunson. He was, or at least early in his career, one of the best drivers in the NBA.
Yeah, and I've got some thoughts on Malcolm Brogdon as well, which I will give in just a moment when we get back in, as well as guy with some championship DNA, Gary Payton II. We'll talk about PJ Tucker, Landry Shamet, who on the Knicks himself was the apple of my eye this year, plus some other maybe a little less likely, but nonetheless splashy names that the Knicks could potentially look at as some of their last additions to the team in this offseason. So we'll get into that in just a second when we get back in. But first, I want to let you all know about our friends over at Monarch Money. And do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And I think the big thing for me is looking at things like takeout, subscriptions, stuff like that. Like takeout, sometimes you get into one of those ruts where you're not cooking enough, and then you see it spelled out for you, the amount of money you're spending on takeout, and you go, ooh, man, maybe I ought to go to the grocery store and cook a little more. Monarch Money has helped me see that. Also, subscriptions too. I'm the king of forgetting to cancel those free trials. It saved me more than a few bucks by telling me, "Hey, buddy, you might want to cancel that. You're about to get charged." Oh, thank you, thanks, Monarch. So anyway, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, we're back in to keep talking through these potential free agents, and I don't have too much more to add on Brogdon, Gavin. I'll just say I think what you said about being able to play next to Brunson is key. Granted, I also think that's the case for Smart.
Mhm.
Um, that's probably why the two of them would be at the top of my list. Is that if you can get a guy that you think can play next to Brunson, and I think Clarkson hopefully should be able to as well. I think we've come to the conclusion that Deuce should as well too. I think no matter who you add, if it's going to be another ball handler, if you could have four guys that can all any pairing of them could potentially work, I think that's pretty ideal. Like I think you want to have that level of flexibility. Hopefully, the new staff led by Mike Brown is willing to experiment, get these guys out there at different times, try different things before the playoffs, so that the Knicks have a better idea. But having like a versatile group where a lot of guys can handle the ball, like if they add one of Brogdon or Smart, I would say that three out of the four guards I would consider. I would say that I was like confident that they can handle the ball and run an offense to some degree. And unfortunately, that leaves Deuce out in the cold, who I think is really more of a combo at this point. That is, I just don't necessarily want him bringing the ball down the floor and having to set offense up, though I feel better and better about him, like, just being able to attack off the dribble. But a guy like Brogdon just adds to that. Like, he's a point guard, or at least he was more of a point guard earlier in his career. Now is morphed into more of like a combo. But nonetheless, I would definitely trust him to like potentially run the second unit with Clarkson, or whatever. And he's also big enough that you can reasonably get away with potentially doing a 3 guard lineup with him out there as well. If you want to try like Clarkson, Deuce, and Brogdon all together off the bench, you could potentially do that, run a lot, have a good time. So I'm totally down with that. But if you want to talk about other guys that I feel pretty good about a potential 3 guard lineup with, that would be Gary Payton II, 6'2", 32-year-old shooting guard. Kind of blew my mind that he's the same age as Brogdon and older than Marcus Smart.
He got a very late. I think he started playing rotation minutes at 25 years old, if I'm remembering
Exactly.
correctly. So yeah.
So he's a little behind the curve. So, hey, whatever. But last year, 6.5 points, 3 boards, 1 assist on 57, 33, 71 shooting splits. So 57% from the field, 33% from 3. You noted in our notes here, shot 39% from 3 in the playoffs, which was great. Really versatile defender. Another guy that can play bigger than he looks, because he has a really good wingspan, and also just probably thanks to his dad, has that dog in him. Goes out there and it shows no fear on defense ever. Little on the, I mean, I guess this is kind of the case for all 3 of these guys, perhaps why all 3 of them remain unsigned, but uh, a little bit of a injury risk, I think,
Mhm.
for all 3 of them, honestly, for Peyton, for Brogdon, and for Smart. All 3 of them have had health issues in recent years with staying on the court. And so that would worry me a little bit. Also, not the ball handler that either of those 2 guys are. I would not really trust Gary Payton II bringing the ball down the floor and like initiating offense at this point. But if he could be a good spot up shooter, if he can give you that good defense, sort of just play like I don't want to quite say a DeLon Wright type, because DeLon Wright actually did, to his credit, handle the ball and initiate some offense in some pinches for the Knicks last year. But if he just plays sort of almost a Josh Hart-esque role, something like that, if you want to say
I
that,
think that I think that's a good comp for him. Yeah.
yeah, then
And
that's
that he's going to be left wide open from 3.
yeah,
He can't make them.
very true,
Yeah.
and hopefully can cash them. But yeah, I would feel pretty good about them if they signed him. I mean, again, I would still take Brogdon or Smart over him, but ultimately it's free agency because these players have agency. So if neither of those 2 guys want to come to the Knicks and Gary Payton II did, I would not be too mad at it.
Yeah, he's a guy, certainly in the early days of his career on the Wizards. I know Zach Lowe was always fond of pointing it out. Pound for pound was probably one of the 5 or so best perimeter defenders in basketball, like absolute lockdown. The glovelet. I think Lowe called him the mitten at times, but awesome player. Won a title under Mike Brown, so there could be some of that there. I think it would scare me to get him only in the sense that, like, I think it would be ridiculous if he ever played over Deuce, just because you have a guy who's so much younger, who is infinitely more dynamic offensively. And I would say at this point in their career, probably pretty comparable as defenders. Alex, while you were getting into it, I wanted to look up real quick, like, just the open catch and shoot 3-point stats for both Smart and Peyton, because I don't really have those concerns about Brogdon. But I was like, all right, can these guys actually make shots off of Jalen Brunson? This is absolutely insane for Marcus Smart. He shot on tightly covered 3-point shots, and there's similar volume in all 3 of these. He was at 12.5% last year. He was at 46% on open, which is 4 to 6 feet of space, but he was back down to 26% on wide open. So I don't know if to take anything away from that other than small sample size, but he could certainly benefit off of playing with Jalen Brunson's gravity. He weirdly shot terrible in Memphis, though, and he shot 44% with the Wizards, where presumably he would have had tighter coverage. So that's all weird. Gary Payton II, despite the note about the playoff 3-point shooting, he only shoots when he's open. He did not take a single very tight or tight 3-pointer all of last season, which is insane that he didn't shoot one, even at the end of a shot clock. 33% open, 40% when wide open. So he is not really a shooter. Because of that, he is pretty low on my list. I don't really see him playing for the Knicks unless there are just multiple injuries there. And frankly, to your point on the comp to DeLon Wright, I would just rather have DeLon Wright. But with that, let's get into some of the returners. Landry Shamet is probably the top guy on this list in terms of an actual basketball player. We mentioned earlier in the offseason his stats against the Pacers: 13 minutes per game, 6 points per game, 2 assists, 54% from three on 3.5 attempts per game. Fantastic defense. Like, I was not a big Landry Shamet believer before that series, but I was converted like you. I'm a Shamanite. I go to the church that bears his face every weekend. Pray to our deity. He was sick, and if he was not just hot and he found something in terms of like the level of compete defensively and like the shooting that was just basically red hot from April on. You don't want to assume you're going to get that, but he was really good in the preseason also before the separated shoulder. Historically is a very good shooter. I still think that's a skill set that is hugely valuable to the Knicks. Obviously with Clarkson, you get some of those elements and infinitely more off the dribble. But in terms of just having like a pure knockdown shooter, I think there is definitely a role there for Shamet if Pacom Dadier isn't ready for that. And he is really the only quote unquote wing on this list outside of PJ Tucker who wouldn't actually play, who gets consideration. So I have him like pretty much up there with Smart and Brogdon at the top of my list. But Alex, given that we've said over and over again, there's a very likely scenario that none of these guys would be guaranteed a spot in the rotation at the start of the season. Is there an argument for bringing back PJ Tucker, who by all accounts had a pretty dramatic effect on the Knicks locker room?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if he still wants to play another year, which I mean, if he gets the ability to just cash a check and be a veteran leader or whatever, and he seemed to enjoy the Knicks locker room and all that, like why would he not do it? Um, from that perspective, yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to bring him in. He's obviously he's not going to give you anything on the court, so I think that's the only. I think that's kind of like the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause here is given how restrictive this second apron situation is for the Knicks this year, which I think it's even more restrictive than it was last year. Like
Mhm.
the fact that the Knicks are now pressed with a situation where had Yabusele taken the whole taxpayer mid level, like they wouldn't have even been able to sign two veteran roster spots still, which is again just like in my opinion, at least another huge failing of this new CBA. I don't understand how you're not allowing teams to at least pay veteran minimum players who don't have a market otherwise, but that's neither here nor there. I could write a whole episode about why I think this new CBA stinks. But like to bring in a guy that you pretty much know off rip is not going to contribute for you, given that we saw last year that there was a time in the middle of the season where like Brunson was out and a number of other guys were out, and you had to rely on like DeLon Wright to give you some point guard minutes. You had to rely on Shaman at different times. These were guys that like we sort of thought were buried. We didn't think DeLon Wright was going to play at all, and yet he did. Um, that's the only thing that gives me pause of bringing back PJ Tucker, where I'm like, if he's available, you could bring in Marcus Smart, who I think probably gives you many of the same things personality wise and rallying the troops wise and
Mhm.
whatever to a PJ Tucker. And yet, like, as long as he's okay, as long as he's not going to get political about it or like be complaining that he's not getting minutes or whatever, and he's willing to like just take what he's given, you at least know that like you can rely on him to still play at this point. Whereas PJ, it's just like we only saw a few minutes. He's an old dude. He's like 40 something, and he's not LeBron James, you know. So he's like aging. So it's fine. It's respectable, you know, that he's still out there and still wants to be like part of the game. But it's just I don't know. I don't know that I would bring him back personally, just for that reason. But if the Knicks, you know, I don't know, find some way to wait a bit and then have like a prorated exception later down the line, partway through the season, like towards the end, and someone got hurt and they had to cut them or whatever, and they can sign him for like you know the smallest minimal around the mid season again, like they did this past year, then sure, I guess go for it. But as of this particular moment, I don't think I would sign him just because I think I would want, in theory, most of the guys from players 1 through 14 to be able to suit up if I had to have them do it, just because the cap situation is so dire that like everyone that's on the team should in theory be able to step in and play a little bit. But I'll let you respond to that in just a second, and we'll go through DeLon Wright and then some of the bigger names that we've brought up before, but haven't really brought up recently because they're seem less likely now. But the guys like Russell Westbrook or Chris Paul, even Ben Simmons' name might show up. So there's a few more names to talk about in just a second. When we get back in to Locked On Knicks. All right, we're back
So
in. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, Gavin.
yeah. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure which one was bringing back. Anywho, to counter that, there was reporting. I think even before Mike Brown was hired, this might have been from. I think this was actually from Fred Katz in his post hire article about Mike Brown, that one of the mandates for the new coach was to obviously priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to a million is winning a championship and being ready for the playoffs, and having the top 9 be as cohesive and competitive as possible. But also, unlike Tom Thibodeau, develop the young talent through on-court opportunities that are not exclusively in Westchester. So I think the argument for a PJ Tucker is, one, like, this locker room was, by all accounts, very much in disarray at times. I don't know if PJ totally solved that. Like, we haven't devoted like a full Zapruder episode to a Cat and OG screaming at each other on the bench yet, but there were certainly, even in a fantastic playoff run post PJ Tucker, there were certainly still cracks there. But by all accounts, like, he made a big difference. I thought you saw Josh Hart's mood in particular, like, immediately pick up. You constantly saw PJ hyping these guys from the bench. I do agree with you. Marcus Smart, by all accounts, so like read up on the work he did for Boston Children's Hospitals. If I'm remembering correctly, is also a fantastic guy and could probably bring a lot of that to the table. I think very similar to what Udonis Haslem did on the Miami Heat. Like, the smarter organizations realize there is a place for those guys, and if you want to ensure, hey, if there is an injury, like, let's see what Pacom Dadier can do. Let's see what Kevin McCullough can do. Someone I'm weirdly confident could come out there and give you like a solid 10 minutes if needed. If there's a guard injury, maybe Tyler Kolek, who we saw like play really impressive stints when Jalen Brunson got hurt, could come out there and make a positive impact and get different guys going and give you just a completely different look at the point guard spot than you would get from Brunson and certainly from Jordan Clarkson. So I do think there is some value in just creating a lane and a possibility that some of the younger guys can get involved. I obviously, there is not a coherent argument that on the court, PJ is in any way an improvement over Marcus Smart or Malcolm Brogdon. I will quickly shout out DeLon Wright one more time. I thought he was very good in a limited role for the Knicks. And I think if he was ultimately the decision for whatever reason, I would be perfectly fine with that. But Alex, you mentioned a couple more names. I'll let you hit on some of the starrier guys. The most realistic one I'm looking at is Trey Lyles, someone that Mike Brown just pretty consistently, from what I remember, loved and played in Sacramento, and someone who stuck in the rotation throughout his time there. Seems like he's maybe on the back nine a little bit, 29 years old, 6.5 points, 4.5 rebounds last season. His worst 3-point shooting season the last couple of years, where he was up at 36 and 38% respectively the previous 2 seasons, down to 34% last year, only 42% from the field, 70% from the line. If you want a little bit more flexible size that maybe is slightly more defensively leaning than Yabusele, but I'm not even super confident in saying that. Trey Lyles would be an option. I do think Yabusele kind of covers your ground there, though I wouldn't be opposed just to having like one more traditional power forward. But do you think any of the other bigger names are a possibility, or could a former fan favorite maybe have his third stint as a New York Knick?
Yeah, I'll just shout out Chris Boucher real quick as well.
Mhm.
Kind of the same deal as Trey Lyles. If they want someone who can, in theory, shoot, and in theory give them some defense. I mean, Boucher is pretty lanky, but holds his own pretty well on the inside. So maybe another guy to look at is just like a utility big. But from that perspective, I'm almost more comfortable just rolling the dice with Huck Porty this year. And maybe even having like if they decide to use the second round uh draft pick exception for the second spot, bringing over James Najee, who has like crazy measurables, and
Mhm.
just see how he does. Granted, we'll get to see him in summer league, which will be really exciting. So maybe that'll completely sell us on him and say that we want him as the reserve big. But yeah, either way, another intriguing name. But yeah, the bigger names, I mean, Chris Paul, I feel like we could pretty safely rule out at this point. Although it's weird because I really did think there was going to be a potential chance that he would end up with the Knicks because of the Leon Rose connection. I can still remember I was lucky enough to be covering the team in person when Chris Paul visited the Garden almost right after Leon Rose got announced as president, and it was like still during the Mike Miller coaching days and everything. And Chris Paul talks about him like a family member. So
Mhm.
um, interesting that it just was never in the cards, but it also sounds like he wants kind of a guaranteed role for his last season. Sounds like he definitely kind of wants like a goodbye tour of some sort. And
Wants to be
it
near his family, I think, is the
wants to be
biggest
near his
thing. Yeah.
family as well. And it seems like the Clippers and the Suns are pretty high on the list because his family lives in LA. So
Mhm.
it seems like we could pretty safely rule him out. Russell Westbrook and the Kings, I think, are still like pretty openly lusting over one another,
Mhm.
and yet that hasn't come to fruition yet. It might just be contingent on them moving Malik Monk or something to avoid the tax or whatever it is they're trying to do by potentially moving Malik Monk. So maybe that's all we're waiting on for that. But the Westbrook thing, I think, kind of died to me at least once they signed Yabu. I feel like Westbrook is going to want somewhere around exception money more so
Yeah.
than veteran minimum, though he also just loves playing basketball. So I think if his market dries up and he has to take a veteran min, he will. I think he just would prefer not to. So we'll see. Maybe that's not dead yet, but I'd be more than willing to bet that it probably is. Um, which then brings me to Alec Burks, who you noted in our notes here had a career high 42.5% from three on 4 attempts per game last year. So maybe a guy worth looking at, as long as Mike Brown promises to never play him a point guard, like Tibbs did. But why not bring him back potentially for another stint? I mean, he's already come back once before, so maybe could do it again. I like his game. I mean, he's a scorer. He's a hooper at heart. I mean, between him and Clarkson, if you wanted to throw both of them out there, you got guys that could break down a defense and score like crazy at their best. But I also feel like because they got Clarkson, maybe they want a different archetype. It does seem like they're more prioritizing like a ball handler, which I don't think I would consider Burks to be one in the sense of setting the table for everyone else. Again, as we learned when Tibbs experimented with that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'd be open to it. So yeah, up to you if you got anything to say on Burks or I don't think I really got anything to say on Ben Simmons. So if you want to say that that's a name that's still been out there too. I think I'm mostly staying away from Ben Simmons because I don't know if he cares about basketball. And I don't think you want that guy on like you want to talk about how PJ Tucker could be a good locker room guy, like potential complete antithesis of that with Ben Simmons potentially. Even though the fact that he's a 6'10" guy that can pass like he can and defend like he can, in theory, is always gonna be one of the great what ifs of NBA history. I just think we've seen enough at this point to know probably should stay away from him for a team that really has something to play for at this point.
Yeah, it would be a great dribble handoff hub, but that is pretty much where he maxes out offensively at this point, unless he's in transition. 30-second final note before we end this episode. James Borrego staying with the Pelicans for anyone who missed it. Someone the Knicks were pursuing. Someone I was really excited to potentially see as part of Mike Brown's staff. I know Mike Brown sought him out to be his top assistant. Understandable that the Pelicans would not let him out of his contract for a parallel move. So that was always going to be a long shot. Maybe the Knicks circle back. I know our guy Schwinn mentioned Terry Stotts or some other creative, offensive-minded head coach. Phil Handy was another name. He committed to the Mavs today. Assistant coaching market is drying up, so I'm interested to see the Knicks make some moves in the near future. But tomorrow, Alex, we are going to preview Summer League, some things to watch for all four rookies from last year. We'll talk about Diawara a little bit. I'm really excited to get into it. It's one of my favorite times of the year, so we're going to be talking Summer League tomorrow on Locked On Knicks.